The way that we know how to be in relationship is through this attachment trauma model. And that's sobering. It's also discouraging, because the very thing that we're attempting to create in our life is also the place where we're most deeply hurt and wounded. Hello, I'm Robarge, an attachment-focused psychotherapist and a relationship educator. I like to talk about how to heal attachment trauma and improve our relationships. On this video, let's talk about what is developmental emotional attachment trauma. Let's explore specifically what that means and also name some concrete action steps that you can apply to your self-directed healing work. Now, for my work with clients over the years, I've been developing and promoting a model of self-directed healing. And at its core, it's about three things. It's about listening to your self-wisdom, leading with self-action, and choosing self-compassion. And all three of those things combined and working together equals loving yourself. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to apply this model of self-directed healing work to talking about attachment trauma. And let's begin by breaking down the very specific words, and we'll begin with trauma itself. What is it? We can think of trauma as a complete overload to your nervous system, and that's based upon something that happened that was a threat to your well-being. And your brain codes this threat as not being safe, and it will also include an aspect of trust has been breached, trust has been violated. There's also a violation of your being. Boundaries are violated. It could be physical due to proximity, due to your body. It's also your sense of self has been violated. So all of these things together, this threat of your well-being, your nervous system being overloaded with an experience that is unsafe, that's violating aspects of who you are, and also trust is now confused and compromised and breached, and that's going to register in your brain, in your body. It codes itself in your nervous system as a trauma. Now, it's very important to think of a distinction between event-based trauma or incident-specific trauma. We can name a particular time and place. We can name something that happened. We can say, a tornado, an earthquake, a natural disaster, a car accident, something that you can put on the calendar. That it happened, some form of violence, some form of an assault, something that happened, and that's an incident-based trauma. However, when we think of developmental trauma, we're thinking about our maturing and developing as a human being from childhood into adulthood, and that going through these building blocks, going through these stages of development, there was an interruption in our maturing. There was an obstacle, there's a roadblock. So we can't necessarily pinpoint and say, well, on this particular date, such and such happened. But there was coded in our experience, in what we're talking about, emotional trauma, that over time is impacting our well-being and is being experienced as a violation to our sense of self. When we think of developmentally growing and maturing, we think about what elements do we need in order to survive. And developmental trauma means that something was missing. And what was missing was emotional nourishment. What was missing were relationships that provided a certain degree of emotional connection and presence and resonance and attunement. And other words that we could use here, the opposite of that for being emotionally ignored, lack of engagement, neglect, emotional neglect. So any kind of emotional absence that's ongoing and chronic through our developmental years, when it overwhelms our nervous system, our attachment system, and we're unable to integrate what it means when those most important people to us, most likely your primary caregivers, your parents, your family members, if they're not really there, fully there, either in presence emotionally, and then also some family members are literally absent and physically not there. All of this combined is creating our attachment trauma. Now, what do we mean by attachment? Our attachment system is our physiological built-in operating system for how we bond and how we create relationships with others. And it's this very important system that we use our whole life to both function and to interact in the world. I mean, it's how we get along. So trauma that takes place or is playing out in our relationships, it's living in the attachment system. And what does this mean for you? What does this mean for me? It means that intimacy and vulnerability are the gateways to the trauma. The intimacy and the vulnerability become our triggers because the trauma is intertwined with the attachment system. So by attempting to connect, attempting to have emotional exchange, attempting interpersonal interaction or interpersonal back and give and take to show up in relationship. And the moment that we practice intimacy and practice being emotionally vulnerable, that most likely, for those of us who have attachment trauma that's unhealed and unintegrated, it's going to be the gateway to activate that attachment trauma. When our attachment trauma is unintegrated and unhealed, it means that we're now relating through the trauma. So we're repeating. We will repeat this bonding with people through the set of beliefs and the behaviors that we learned originally. So the way that we know how to be in relationship is through this attachment trauma model. And that's sobering. It's also discouraging because the very thing that we're attempting to create in our life is also the place where we're most deeply hurt and wounded. I need to come back around real quick to acknowledge something said earlier, that the difference between incident-specific trauma and developmental attachment-based trauma, I presented those a bit as either or, and I want to be more inclusive of saying both most probably, or for not most probably, but for many of us, both occurred. That we experienced a developmental emotional attachment trauma, and then we also simultaneously could have had certain incident-specific types of trauma that either were created because the attachment bonds are not very strong and there's not healthy relating going on in the family or in whatever context that these incidents occurred. But just to acknowledge that oftentimes it's not just one or the other. We have a kind of a mixture of both, and then we're trying to sort through looking at not only our development and growing up and the stages that we took in our maturing and doing an assessment of where we're at today, but also needing to do some healing work around very specific events or situations that occurred that also were traumatic. So what do we do? What's next? That's going to be the content of more videos. And the reason why I acknowledge that is that this is not a quick fix. This is not a 30-second soundbite, or reduced down to very simplistic bullet points of, do this, do this, do this. That being said, we do want to ask ourselves, are we committed to our healing work? We want to know, do we have the skills that it takes to look at our attachment trauma? And that's the invitation to you. That's what self-directed healing work is all about. A good place to start, an approach that I like to take with clients, is three things to look at. How do you heal your relationship to your past? How do you heal your relationship to yourself? And how do you heal your relationship to relating? And I'm going to explain what each of those means. To heal your relationship to the past, I'm sure you have an understanding already what that means. It is inviting looking at your childhood, looking at family dynamics, understanding that you are a product of your history. It might include intergenerational trauma and realizing that your trauma is exacerbated, influenced, or compounded because of intergenerational trauma. And then also the inherited beliefs, the cognitions, the understandings, the norms, just the template that we inherit of how you're supposed to be in relationship, that is informed or came out of this attachment trauma. And so in order to do your healing work, there needs to be looking at your relationship to the past. Now, as I've already said, the next piece that we're going to look at or explore is to heal your relationship to yourself. This is dynamic. There's a lot of layers here. This is returning to developmentally framing what did you get, what didn't you get in your stages of development, and how do you need to rework that into your life today. It's what we would call inner child self-reparenting, which that also carries over into doing some of that family childhood work. But healing your relationship to yourself is looking at where you're at in your maturing, your maturity, and where would you like to go. It means strengthening a sense of self, having a sense of self, knowing that the attachment trauma impacted your sense of self. It's knowing your values, your preferences, asserting desires, enforcing your boundaries, being able to identify when boundaries are violated and how you need to repair them. And most importantly, or it culminates in the ability to take action. If we are a self, if we have a strong sense of self and we know our preferences, our values, who we are, in order to fulfill our desires and to act upon what we need and want for ourselves, we need to be able to take action. And the ability to do that is a very separate, distinct skill called agency. And for a number of us who have some history in attachment trauma, we are limited to the ability to assert our will so that we assert agency to get what you want in order to engage moving forward with the thing that you say you need or want or are hoping to do. So strengthening a sense of self, doing your healing work around your relationship to yourself also includes looking at your ability to follow through with a sense of agency. This means knowing how to advocate for yourself, knowing how to take care of yourself, and everything that I'm talking about in this particular focus is really about loving yourself. We just lump it all together, one label, and say this is really about loving yourself. The other area to focus on is what is your relationship to relating? How do you relate? Not so much intellectually, but now we're talking about real world practice, going out in the world, inviting corrective experiences, surrounding yourself with people who know how to engage in secure, healthy relating, and you are practicing giving yourself what you didn't have in earlier years, and you're inviting some new experiences so that you can see how when you risk emotional intimacy, that can create some distress, it can create some fear, some of the old beliefs will pop in and you need to confront those or allow yourself to be compassionate and gentle with yourself, that it's that old way of thinking again, and you begin to make some choices of how do you show up differently in relationship. And what we're talking about is the art of relating, to study relating in relationships as an art. You know, how do people bond? How do people create quality, secure attachment? And what this means is knowing how to offer emotional openness and finding people who like to reciprocate emotional openness. And when we do this, we're creating corrective experiences. The more corrective experiences that we have, we are over time overwriting or rewiring our brain, and we are changing our attachment template. We're moving into a more securely attached way of being. This means knowing and valuing being there for others. You have to genuinely like being in relationship and have a genuine curiosity to want to connect, to want to share who you are and want to invite someone else to share who they are. And when we do this, when we practice this relating, we are strengthening, healing, learning about our relationship to relating itself. Now, to do your healing work, you need a plan. And the model that I teach and have been developing over the years is to create a plan with self-directed healing work. And self-directed healing work doesn't mean that you're isolated, you go it alone, and you're just, thinking about this on your own in your head. It does mean reach out to people. It's important to have others to talk to about your progress and to share ideas and to learn together. This is why I created the membership community, Improve Your Relationships. We are a group of learners, like-minded learners who come together who really like relationships. We know that it's important to learn, to grow, and to be open about our blind spots and how we want to assemble, collect some new skills and look at different areas that we can continually improve. And we come together in the membership community for conversation and support. And when we invest in our healing, we are changing our relationship patterns and learning better skills of relating. You too can learn about the community by checking out alanrobarge.com/community. In closing, I want to name why we do this work. Our attachment trauma keeps us disconnected in our relationships. And that often includes feeling disconnected from ourselves. This disconnect is extremely painful. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about because you wouldn't be watching this video otherwise. Chances are you desire, like all of us, you desire secure, reliable, attuned connections in your life. You're not alone. Many of us can relate. I can relate. The good news here is that healing attachment trauma is possible. So please take from this video some encouragement. Please know that there is hope if you do your healing work and if you invest in growing and learning. The truth is that we all want to love and be loved. We all want meaningful relationships. We do this work because our relationships are important and because emotional connections matter. And remember, we're all in this together. Your healing is my healing. When we heal ourselves, we're also healing the world. So thank you for watching. More videos are on the way. Now go out there and create healthy relationships.